Andrew Haeg is the founder of the mobile engagement platform GroundSource and co-founder of the Minneapolis news site Southwest Voices. Haeg is a crowdsourcing pioneer in the world of journalism, having worked for 20 years to help newsrooms more effectively engage their audiences. But this experience wasn't enough to help him avoid a pivotal and potentially business-threatening event, which we discuss in detail. In his pursuit for the freedom to call his own shots, he took on grant funding that dried up shortly after he started scaling his business. Haeg's attempt at blending nonprofit and for-profit business is as exciting as it is gut-wrenching, and the pain he has endured for his business is palpable. My name is Nick Haralambis, and I won't keep you waiting any longer to hear from Andrew Haeg. So remember, it's not over until it's over. So welcome back to It's Not Over. Andrew, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited.
So we go back. We've crossed paths over the last, 10 years or so, all over the show in the media world. So I'm excited about this because your business is interesting. Your experience of it is interesting. And when we were off air, you were talking about the meshing of purpose and profit and sustainability. So let's set the scene for listeners and viewers. Tell me which business we're going to be talking about, what was going on in that business, and anything else you think that is interesting.
Yeah, so we'll be talking about GroundSource, which is a company I founded in 2012 with the idea of creating a text messaging and engagement platform designed specifically for media, for publishers. I came out of the broadcast world I worked at American Public Media for a long time and was kind of an entrepreneur there and saw a need and an opportunity to scale up text messaging, feeling that was a channel that was being underutilized, but also had this incredible promise for being inclusive and broad-based and intimate and personal and all the things it's proven to be. So started that in 2012 and mainly bootstrapped it, got some grant funding because I've been, as you just kind of referenced, at this intersection of kind of mission-driven and now for-profit work. The kind of work I do tends to be eligible for grants. There's a lot of grant money in the United States for journalism and especially for community-driven kind of journalism projects. So I got an initial grant to start it and then was really from that point on bootstrapping based on customer revenue and trying to keep things really lean while I was iterating. Tried to raise money from investors on several occasions, and it's just the sector we were in. My background coming out of media, not necessarily, didn't have a co-founder who is a techie or coming out of a Google or Facebook or, something like that. So a mix of not having a lot of launch trajectory, our velocity wasn't that great. And my background didn't have all the kind of the trappings of someone, you would fund, to the tune of millions of dollars before there was really a business. So, which actually turned out to be just fine in the long run because I didn't want to end up hiring more bosses for myself. I think I made the entrepreneurial leap in part because I saw an opportunity, but also as probably like a lot of entrepreneurs, I wanted the freedom to call my own shots and the autonomy to write my own ticket and make my own schedule. So part of me kind of felt like even being successful at getting an investor could be a bad thing because I'd be hiring someone else who'd be helping dictate the direction of my company. So anyways, that's was kind of the backdrop, and I'm happy to jump into the first near-death experience. There have been so many, but you tell me what we should talk about next.
Cool. Okay, so I'm interested in a little bit more detail about the business. So What's the revenue model? Is it a non-for-profit exclusively? Is it funding backed? Like, how do you make money and stay sustainable so that we've got context for this near-death experience?
Yeah, so we charge subscriptions, a monthly subscription fee or an annual subscription fee to newsrooms that use the service, and that's based on how many people they're engaging and how often. So generally, and then there's an onboarding fee. And the onboarding fee was really designed because we were seeing organizations, become curious about text messaging, grab the platform, do the self-service kind of software as a service model where they, this kind of hands-free, they go off and do it themselves. And then those clients were churning quite a bit because they weren't using the platform very effectively. So we saw the need to really have an onboarding phase where they were both putting some skin in the game, i.e. money to pay for the onboarding, so they felt more invested in it. That would filter out bad customers. It would pay us for our time to make sure that they were successful. And so that the onboarding fee plus a monthly subscription fee, that kind of, it's a pay as you grow model. So the more people they engage, the more they pay in terms of subscription fees. So yeah, that's how we make money. And so what was the other question?
No, that's good. That's good. So now give me some context on the near business death experience you want to talk about. When is it, and how big is the company while you're going through this this thing, and then what is it?
Yeah, so it was about, I should have looked at the exact date. So it was about 4 years ago. So let's say 2017 into 2018. We were, on track to make, $350,000 a year at that point. And growing, their clients became more and more interested, and felt like we were at this inflection point. Because we had bootstrapped everything, a lot of the technology was cobbled together, a bit of duct tape here, a bit of wire, a bit of string. And it all was functional, but it wasn't as intuitive or as kind of self-service. I mean, the ideal of a self-service software as a service model was obviously very appealing because clients could self-onboard. And I felt like a lot of my time was spent, effectively being the interface for that, which was not very scalable. So the idea was we had some grant money coming in through the door, which was it's called the Community Listening and Engagement Fund. And it was to give newsrooms that were curious about using texting and integrating it into their funnel, into their kind of audience engagement plans, enough money to pay for a year-long subscription to GroundSource, and there are other services involved as well. So we had signed up for that, and I helped kind of create this fund with the understanding that there'd be 3 kind of tranches of funding, so 3 cohorts. And there was an application process for the newsrooms. It was great. I mean, it was great in the sense that effectively the grant was paying for us to do a whole lot of marketing and to get a whole lot of people interested in, a whole lot of news organizations interested in using the platform. And so that was all set up, and we were ready to start onboarding those customers, had kind of improved our workflows to handle more customers and to scale up. And that's when things kind of went sideways.
Okay. So tell me about how big is the business as things are going sideways, and is the company on an upward trajectory generally?
Yeah, so it's $300,000 to $350,000 a year in revenue, and definitely on an upward trajectory.
And in terms of staff, is it just yourself, or how big is the team?
It was myself, another full-time customer success manager, some contract front-end developers, and then a full-time kind of full-stack developer. So depending on the day.
Is it a side hustle for you?
No, it was my main thing. I had the benefit of having a spouse who's has a stable kind of income. So I was, not that I wanted to have a variable income, but I had a little bit more flexibility to not have to necessarily every month hit a certain number. And we had also hired a kind of CTO and a kind of ops person, a COO type person, with the understanding, and this is where we get into how it went sideways. So we had staffed up and scaled in preparation for some growth. And the growth coming from that those grant-funded cohorts of news organizations that be part of this fund. But also, presumably, if we nailed that, a lot more business beyond that. And then we got into this kind of the funding period. The first cohort came through, we added, I don't know, what it was, like 10 or 15 news organizations, something like that, closer to 10. And then there was some ambiguity about how many cohorts would actually be involved. And then the people who were kind of administering the grant got squirrely about, wanting other platforms to be involved in this fund. And, there was a big foundation involved, and that'll remain nameless, that, whether it was the politics or just the the kind of dynamics of what was going on behind the scenes there was making it uncertain that all 3 cohorts would come through. So we had basically projected a certain amount of cash coming in because of 3 cohorts of, 10 news organizations at the piece, each of them spending, a couple $1,000s in onboarding and, several $100s a month in terms of subscription fees. And we had staffed up on that basis. So you can see where the kind of the iceberg is coming here. They decided to cut out one of those cohorts without really informing us. So we were left with a big gaping hole in our spreadsheet to the tune of probably $150,000 or so. And that was money that we were going to spending on a team of developers and software designers to kind of re-engineer the whole thing and then make a much more intuitive platform to allow for self-onboarding, but also to make it a more kind of delightful experience. So we had, a really good CTO who I'd worked with before, awesome designer, excellent front-end developers, and they got to about, and an ops guy who's kind of helping orchestrate the whole thing while I was kind of working as the product brain and the customer kind of facing person. And we got to probably about 90% complete on this whole re-engineering when we just strictly ran out of money. There was no more money. And I was leveraged in the sense that I had borrowed from my retirement. Thankfully, I didn't just take the money out and cash out, but I borrowed against it. And, personal credit cards as well as a business loan. So I was, not leveraged to the extent that I felt like things were existentially bad, like file for bankruptcy. But, it was more than $100,000 in debt, probably $150,000 in debt that we had taken on in order to effectively produce this new product or version 2 of the product, with the expectation that there would be cash on the other end of that with this grant and with the kind of growth from these customers to pay for that. And then we would get to this point where things are moving faster. We've got this great interface. We're on par with, in terms of just the software itself, not certainly the company, on par with a MailChimp or, a SurveyMonkey in terms of intuitiveness. And in a category that really there wasn't really an established leader in that category. Very fractured, lots of little companies. If we were able to kind of pull it off and kind of like thread the needle, that we could be maybe not a category winner, but certainly a nice looking company, with a good growth trajectory, plus doing work that was, in many cases purpose driven. And so I just felt like we were on the right path, and that just, that almost, that's why I'm on the show, that almost killed us. And it was waking up to, run out of credit on this account, topped out the credit on that account. Where's the money going to come from, even to pay for the debt service on that? And I'm not and I think this will become clear as we talk, I'm not a seasoned operator at this level. I'm not running super sophisticated forecasts and spreadsheets in the background. A lot of it is certainly not back of the napkin, but it's not like, we have a CFO or, we're not, it wasn't a big operation. So a lot of this feels and was seat of the pants, which is, a bit crazy to say, kind of taking that level of risk without a whole lot of, operational infrastructure. But it's just the nature of running lean and bootstrapping something is like, you have to wear a bunch of hats, and the hats I wore well were the product hats, the customer hats, the listening to the whole industry, kind of looking around the corner in terms of where things are going. And I tried to find the hats for technology and finance and ops, and to some extent did, but we just didn't have enough sophistication in those areas to be able to see the iceberg coming.
So let's unpack this a little. You've got a proof of concept, you've gone to market, things are working, then you get a grant. The grant says 3 cohorts, and you guys start tooling up, scaling up to cater for these 3 cohorts and an influx of about 30 to 40 new customers. Things are looking good. And then my question is, when this grant started to change shape, were there no contracts in place? Was there no desire to notify you more effectively? Is this how grants work in the world of purpose-driven businesses? Like, how come this wasn't more formalized from their perspective? I mean, you're a startup, obviously you're responding, but I'm always frustrated by this side of the world that there is a very fluid way to operate inside of this grant world. And like, why weren't there contracts?
It's a good question. I think it's kind of like, so as a for-profit business, receiving a grant, already you feel like a level of like, I felt a level of gratitude and a level of like, this is an unusual arrangement, How many for-profit companies that are building, ostensibly a scalable software platform are eligible to receive a grant to do work that's, So part of it is, the saying in the States, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Does that track in England and in South Africa?
Yep.
Just don't ask too many questions because this pot of money might go away. So there's a bit of that, which is kind of not documented, and I'm not writing that down anywhere. But that's the way I felt. And then, and it's, the asymmetry in the power dynamic between the funders. And this is why I know my work at American Public Media and a lot of my work in media has been grant funded. And I find that it very often, a couple things. One is it skews your objectives on a day-to-day basis from serving some end community or some end customer to making sure you're meeting the grant deliverables. So whatever was written in that grant becomes your North Star, and not, whereas, business may change day to day, or the dynamics of the market may change day to day, and your North Star should be your customer, in this case, the community, and not like whether someone in an office building in Miami thinks that you've checked the boxes on this specific grant. But that's just the reality of grants. You have to meet deliverables, which is, often fine. But it's, the influence they have to kind of make capricious decisions that, without any accountability, just puts you at a disadvantage. And there's a power differential there that can create dynamics like this. And if we were to go to them and say, hey, you agreed to deliver us X many dollars in business, that might have been a difficult conversation to have. We never had it, and we probably should have. But it's why I've wanted to distance myself from grant-funded projects. As much as I say that, I'm working on grant-funded projects right now, but more like distance myself from actors in those spaces that I feel aren't acting with accountability or good faith. And I think increasingly we know who some of those funders are. But I think to me, it was always the desire was to have the exchange be a valuable service. You give me your credit card number, or you give Stripe your credit card number, processes the payment every month, and if you don't like the service, you cancel it. That to me is the most honest exchange in this space, the software space, versus like, hey, we got a grant to fund this work so our newsroom can do it. And that creates a weird dynamic for the newsroom too, because they're getting grant funding to do something that they may not be culturally or strategically or organizationally set up to do well. So I don't know. I've grown to be more circumspect about getting into deals like that. And for the reasons I just talked about too. It's like the entire grant money may not come through, or it may take them 12 months to cut the check or whatever. And so you're exposing yourself to a lot of risk if you're making big decisions like hiring and investing in infrastructure based on a lot something that has a lot of uncertainty around it.
So at the time you've scaled up staff and the first cohort goes through, the second and third are starting to look questionable. How do you respond as the founder, the CEO? Do you start getting rid of people, trying to find other income sources? Like, what happens at that immediate time?
Well, it's funny too. We had just started adopting an operational framework called EOS or traction. Are you familiar with that? I'm usually kind of allergic to operational models. It's just not how I think. So we thought we had to keep the sailing metaphor, we thought we had the steering wheel. We thought we had all the instrumentation that we needed to successfully look out into the future and say, here's where the risks are showing up. But it's clear that we didn't. And when that became obvious, thankfully I felt like I had hired people and was working with people who candor was was a big value of mine, and it was something that the rest of us shared. So there was no secret. It wasn't like I was staying up till 3 a.m. crunching numbers in spreadsheets, not telling anyone, and showing up to work with a smile on my face and trying to pretend like all was well when we were about to fall off a cliff. I don't think we factored in the risk of the money not coming through, or we were taking on a very professional, large organizational approach to building software. We were, it wasn't a waterfall. Certainly, it was agile and all the good things now with scrums and you name it. But it was like we hired a bunch of people for it, and we'll get to that later. But one of the things I've learned from that is got to be scrappier than that. You can't act like a big company if you're a small company. But I was having honest conversations with everyone, and it became clear. And in fact, one case, and I'm eternally grateful for this, the person who we ended up letting go suggested it himself. He's like, look, I don't think these numbers are adding up, and I think, I don't think you can afford to pay me. Not as it wasn't a confrontational conversation. It was a difficult conversation because he saw the writing on the wall, and he didn't want, I think we had enough trust between us that he knew I would make decisions in our best interest. And I wasn't taking much of a salary at that point. So it wasn't like I was sitting there, paying myself a great deal of money and then, so I think there was a lot of trust on the team, even though, we were entering a difficult moment. And the part that I kind of most regret is the wrong word because I've learned a lot from it, but we got so close to being able to ship the software. So close. 50 hours of labor, something like that. But of course, we'd have to support it, and it was a new piece of software, and those take a while to harden and to mature. So even if we had just made it to the 50 hours, we would have needed more gas in the tank to actually operate the new thing.
Yes, you had the conversation with your team, and you let how many people go? Just the one?
No, let ops go, CTO go, the customer success person go, and it ended up getting down to me and a full-time developer. Who is based in Mombasa in Kenya, actually. And then uncertain as to whether we could continue operating just on a day-to-day basis, even with that stripped down, skeleton crew, to support the customers we had. And then there was the prospect too of do we want to be a walking zombie for the next several years and just make ends meet? And then, of course, you get into the, what were my options? What did I feel like what were my plan Bs and Cs? What could I do? And, I was still very invested personally and to an increasing extent in terms of debt, just like in terms of money, invested in this company not just folding. I didn't want to just say, I'm done with it, because that would have probably meant filing a personal bankruptcy and going through a lot of financial stuff. And I felt like there was a business there. We just made a swing at it that was a swing and a miss. And and I'm a serial entrepreneur, but the big hockey stick growth and big payday was never what I was in it for, which I've begun to wonder maybe that's actually good to be in it, for the money, because it keeps you really focused on some key things. And the mix of purpose-driven and for-profit, sometimes things get ambiguous as to why you're doing things. But that also meant that I didn't feel like, it wasn't the end of the world for me. I live a perfectly comfortable life, and everyone was fine. And I'm fortunate to have a home that we own and financial resources available and I don't need a lot. And I don't want for I'm not that interested in owning a Tesla, even though they've become cheaper, or like whatever the prototypical things you do as a successful entrepreneur. Those don't interest me. I just, like I said, the autonomy of doing it, the challenge of building something new, doing something that could be scalable and lasting and kind of improve communities and people. Like those are the things that motivate me, and a for-profit company for me was the vehicle to do that. And I felt like there was still enough mojo left in that idea, and I personally still had gas in the tank. I was not done. So I was like, I'm going to stick this out, and we'll see what happens. I can't foresee the future, but
okay.
I made a decision to continue.
And how long was it between the grant being issued and you going down to 2 people? What was that time frame?
It was about 9 months, something like
Pretty
that.
rapid.
It was very rapid.
Yeah.
And it was
Okay.
it was the case of like, we finally got some money coming in the bank, and these are things I've wanted to do for a while. I've wanted to re-engineer the platform.
And with 2 people, did you find that now you had cash flow? Now your core business was kind of actually profitable and you could take some breath to figure out what was next? Or was it, holy shit, panic stations, let's figure this out?
There was definitely several months there of panic station and, waking up and not really knowing how that day was going to play out, that week, that month. And then there were, around when COVID hit, this is not 2 years ago, there was some small business disaster, economic, EIDL, I forget what it stands for, disaster loans. I mean, the disaster was COVID. And a lot of our customers did have to pull back, and newsrooms were doing a lot of rethinking of their budgets. And so it was we were genuinely eligible for it. Our initial shock to the system was not COVID related, but it certainly didn't help. So that loan helped us kind of tide things over, and helped me restructure a bunch of debt out of like high interest credit cards into extremely low interest, a small business loan basically. So that took a lot of the pressure off, because it was a matter of like, I didn't want to expose my family's finances I didn't want those exposed, even though I'd borrowed from the retirement to a certain extent, and there was some personal debt. Being able to restructure that as business debt was huge. Like, it really made a huge difference. So that took the pressure off. And to your point, we were down to a developer and myself, and I could pay myself what I thought, so we were back to running really, really lean. And yes, exactly that. We were able to start kind of becoming a profitable company, and customers, even though a competitor showed up in our space, they were kind of edging in on a lot of customers we were talking to, even though we were in my opinion, a small pond, like, building technology for news media. Even if you're doing it on a global basis, it's not a massively huge business. So having another competitor saying a lot of the same things we were saying was another shock to the system. But even then, we just kept at it, and we kept on writing case studies, kept on doing good work, kept on documenting it. I just made sure, and this is, again, something that it's a core value of mine. I was all about like making sure the customers were having a good experience and being really present for them. And just like, whatever happens, if I do that, I think we'll be okay. And I think it's turned out to be true, that's where we've gotten a lot of referrals. It's like, I give a lot of personal attention to each customer to the extent that I can, and kind of have an intuitive sense of when they're doing well and not doing well. And just doing that, and just kind of building incrementally from that basis, and being really lean, and not feeling that pressure of, there's an investor, we got to really hit the numbers in this quarter. Kind of back to the autonomy, like I was talking about before. And it's enjoyable. I mean, I enjoy it still, and we are growing, and we've got some plans to merge with another company over the next several months. And the space itself is growing, so we're able to kind of navigate through that and get to a really lean operating framework that that's really helped me too. So as like starting this new news outlet in Minneapolis, that's the kind of philosophy and attitude I brought to it. Is like, start really lean. We're going to build the bare minimum of what we need to build, and not one iota more than that. And then our community, be responsive to the community, have that be our North Star. Our everything we do is about listening to and serving the community, and they're going to tell us what we should build next. So I think that's the philosophy I've kind of learned the hard way through GroundSource, and I feel like that is a philosophy now that I bring to other projects. Is start as small as you can, be super responsive to every person who shows up at your doorstep, engaging with your product, and then I think you'll learn what to build from them.
I want to talk more about the personal responses to this, like how you felt, and a variety of questions on that vein. So the first is, while this is all happening, what is Andrew feeling? Like, what are you going through as a human and an individual throughout all of this?
Oh, I mean, the emotions are just all over the board. I think there's some shame. There's some feeling like you messed up, and and it was based on some personal failing, going back to like childhood and like, notes on report cards. He needs to apply himself, or he needs to, whatever. He needs to turn his work in on time. It's just like you kind of like cycle back through childhood memories of feeling inadequate or not like up to the task. And there's a feeling of, there's a part. I have 3 kids. They're a little bit older now, two teenagers and 1 10-year-old. And, when we're going through all this, the oldest is 12 and the youngest is 6, I guess, at that point. And not wanting to, well, there's the financial piece. I don't want to disrupt our family's kind of financial health with a bad decision. So there's that layer of it. But also there's the and I've struggled with this because I'm not sure how much I should think this way, but, setting an example for them, like, hey, dad's an entrepreneur, like they tell their friends, like, hey, dad started a business, next day, hey, dad filed for bankruptcy, dad's business collapsed. Like, that's not I don't know, like, how much weight do you put on something like that? And you want to be honest.
It's not really what you strive for when you start a business, right?
No,
your kids being disappointed in you.
Right, and there's that narrative too, like that narrative becomes its own thing, but, I guess I've grown more comfortable with owning my failures, and I think I appreciate this venue to do that. I think that's something that we're not set up to do, especially because we're, entrepreneurs are by nature optimistic, forward-thinking, growth. There's always something better, and if you to sit in what I would perceive as wallow in one's failures was just not a very attractive prospect to me. So that was, honestly, that's part of like why I've chose to grind it out too. I'm like, the phrase that I kept on coming back to is the only way out is through. Like, that was kind of my mantra through the whole thing. It's like, the only way out of this thing is right through the teeth of it. I can't avoid it. I can't pretend it's not there. I can't, it's kind of like I don't know. I've never climbed a mountain. I don't really plan on climbing a mountain anytime soon. I don't know if that's the right metaphor, but something where, you can't turn back. Just, you might as well complete it. That's kind of became my attitude. So there was that. There was like that oscillating shame, feeling of inadequacy, just the sheer terror of the financial piece of it, not knowing which bill would come due and which bill I couldn't pay. We were using a provider that we had signed an annual contract, and that just was not at a certain recognition of volume, and that just wasn't going to play out. So there were things like that, certain agreements we had made, and certain kind of things we were linked to that were kind of inextricable.
Did you go back to those agreements to get rid of them?
Yeah.
Like, you go back to that annual contract and were like, this is not going to happen. I have to exit. And did you pay penalties around that? Were those hard conversations to have?
Yeah, definitely. And some of them, they're very hard conversations. We had to pull back. Some were, straightforward and, we understand your position and let's see what we can figure out, that kind of thing. Kind of unwinding some of those things. But I think that also led to really beneficial new things because I found a new provider that was a lot less expensive and was able to negotiate a flexible agreement such that there was no minimum commit after a certain amount of time. So even if business dipped below a certain line, we wouldn't be responsible for some of that. So because of those hard lessons, was able to be smarter and a lot more resourceful in negotiating agreements and not getting into that position again. I don't think there's any substitute for going through this and learning from it. At the same time, I wish it upon no one. Like I don't think it's. I think I'm definitely stronger for it. But I think to those feelings, and I think there's also a sense of there's the narrative in the industry too, developing a reputation as someone who's not a good operator or someone who's not able to see things through. And I think too there was a bit of back to the childhood thing, feeling like in childhood a lot of potential, but sometimes didn't see that potential through to its fruition because I either stopped short or I didn't apply myself to that that final 10% that would really. So feeling too I want to change that narrative for myself. So yeah, those are all tangled up, and then you're like, well, what am I doing here? And I think back to maybe it's good to have money be the reason you're doing something, because if that would have been the only reason I was doing this, I would have exited then, probably filed for personal bankruptcy.
So kind of a good segue into what I wanted to ask in relation to this idea of calling it quits, failure, sticking it through, the only way, what were you saying? The only way through this is through this or whatever. Is there now, looking back on everything, is there a point at which you've decided failure is an option? I've been through this near-death experience once. If I have to go through it again, I'm actually going to call it quits, because I am personally a big fan of this. Clicked some what I call failure triggers. This has reached my failure triggers. 3 of the 4 are there. I'm out. It's time for me to start something new.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think I would be way less likely to stick with an idea that I felt like didn't have. But I think also I wouldn't be as highly leveraged going into that in the future. That so I wouldn't be I wouldn't take on personal debt. I would build with customer revenue before I even created the product. That's what I would do next. So I feel yes, I would definitely cut bait or stop something that I felt wasn't working and do it right when. I would be curious to hear what your triggers are. I should actually have those written down. But also that I don't plan on putting myself in that position again, because I'm not going to get out. Not going to leverage myself in an idea that hasn't been proven. Prove the idea way quicker.
The key thing for me, and it's worth, touching on the failure triggers. For me, they're different on every business, but they're contextual to my idea of success triggers too. So, for example, one of my failure triggers is if it keeps me up at night for more than 7 nights in a row, there is a problem. There is something going on. And then I need to reassess. If I can't walk my dogs for 3 days in a row, then I'm working in a way that I'm not comfortable with. If I can't pay salaries for 3 months in a row, then I've got a problem. These are triggers. And then once those triggers all come to fruition at the same time, you have a bigger problem. There is something systemic that is causing these triggers to click every time that you need to reassess. And they are different for every business, and they do tie in with success triggers. For example, one of my success triggers is being able to say no to anything at any time without any negative ramifications. So you, for example, could say no to your grant funding. Anybody ever again. If your business is profitable, success trigger, then you can say no at any time. That's a success trigger for me. So they're contextual, and I think that for me, they help me stay sane, because I know where you are and where you've been with this. It keeps you up at night. It damages your relationships. You don't sleep. You don't eat properly. You don't train. And that's actually the next thread I want to cover. You've mentioned a few times the personal loans that you've taken out, and I have to say I've never done that. I've been lucky that my advisors have always said to me, start a business, take the money out in the business, and then the business folds, the debt is gone. So my question very specifically is, how did your partner feel about the financial commitments you were making to this business?
To the extent that they were fully apparent to her, not awesome. I think that
Not awesome.
she, the belief in what I do and my passion has always been there, but it's always been a little bit hard to pin down the financial piece of it, and I think that's just that's been not always, I shouldn't say that. It has been a weakness of mine. It's just being very meticulous about the financial piece of it. So just like there's a lot of pockets of debt here and there, it's like it was hard to even get a full picture of it. And once you did, and once I sat down and did the math, I'm like, geez, that's not a pretty picture. So we were always solid. I never felt like there was, I never felt like it had driven a wedge deep in our relationship, which I'm, partly credit her for, and feel fortunate to have a partner who's like got just seemingly endless reservoirs of patience for that kind of entrepreneurial spirit.
You and me both, man.
I mean, both. That's probably the book that I would write, or maybe the one that comes next. Is like, either don't marry an entrepreneur, or if you do, here's what you should know.
Here's some shit to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were, and I think just we're able to come up with a plan that we just start chipping away at it, and definitely being able to restructure the personal loans as business debt was massive and took the pressure off overnight.
It is such a key lesson for anyone I coach or any boards I've ever sat on. The number one thing is never take personal surety, never be able to go down with your ship. Building a business should absolutely not be a personal risk for your financial debt. And look, I get that sometimes it's necessary, but there are definitely ways to avoid that if you're listening, you should do. And tied into that, Andrew, is the question of mental health. So how's it been throughout this and coming out of it with your mental health? Have you managed? What have you done? Are you conscious of it? How did that all play out?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely created a lot of anxiety and stress, and not all of which I could fully vent, like fully express, maybe even articulate, because it's just like you're in the hole, and there's not a lot of daylight, and it's your fault. I think there's a Radiohead lyric, "You do it to yourself, that's what really hurts." That's kind of how I felt about it. Self-inflicted, and that like shame spirals and that kind of stuff, and that it's kind of like I haven't experienced like really deep grief, but the waves of it were has followed that wave kind of like pattern, where it'd be like, all right, I got it, we can do this, and then you wake up in the middle of the night and you have that kind of like, oh my God, what the hell, and then it would kind of go like,
why am I doing this to myself?
Yeah. And then typically it was that waking up in the morning where you kind of like go through the layers of waking up, like through the layers of sleep, that realization that it wasn't a bad dream. You're actually in the middle of this thing and you got to figure it out. That was a daily experience for months. But, I had I don't know, like 12, 13 years ago, I got into a fitness regime that I just kind of became part of my identity, and there's just something I do in the morning is work out, and if I don't do it, I feel it, and so it's habitual. It's become habitual, and that was a massive part of how I got through it. It's just like feeling physically fit, and not like drinking too much or like kind of drowning my sorrows in other ways. I didn't I didn't ever do anything like that. Sure, there were probably nights where I'd probably one more drink than I would normally have, but it wasn't to the point where I was like using substances or other things to kind of get through it, which is another, I think, thing that I'm grateful for, is that I didn't, it's not something I chose. Some people don't have that choice. Some people, it's part of their, it's not something you can necessarily choose or not choose, but it just wasn't something it's not how I reacted to it. And then having the fitness piece of it, and then kind of leaning into that actually, and just allowing myself to go on very long walks was massive. Like, I think there's a tendency to kind of grip the wheel even tighter in an emergency like this. And for whatever reason, I took the opposite approach. It's like I kind of let go, and I kind of allowed myself to to relax and to take long walks or go on a long bike ride or get on the exercise bike and really try to hit it and sweat a little bit. And I just can't say enough about that in terms of like getting me through that part, like massive. Just the physical health piece of it. I think had I not had that, I think it, could have ended a lot worse, I should say.
Yeah, there is a big misunderstanding around entrepreneurs or high performers that they put themselves at the bottom of their priority list, when actually, if you put yourself at the top of your priority list and you're selfish with your mental health, your physical health, and the way you eat, then you are a better version of yourself. You can cope with trauma better if you are healthy and fit and mentally okay. If you continually put yourself at the bottom, then everything just piles on top of you and you can't get out from under it. So I'm amazed and really happy to hear that fitness was number one. So as we close out, I think the question that I kind of leave most of my guests with is, what is the thing that you've learned through this near-death experience that you're going to take with you everywhere going forward?
A few things: not to get so deeply leveraged on an idea that hasn't been totally proven. And even when the idea is totally proven, not to get leveraged, so that I can, so that I can continue to dictate my circumstances. To lose control was kind of like the antithesis of what I wanted as an entrepreneur. Like, I think entrepreneurs like having control, and I think if you take on too much debt, or maybe too many investors at the wrong time, you lose that control, you lose that autonomy. So that's one thing, just to maintain autonomy. Another is just to be like super, super resourceful, and to run lean until you can't run lean. Like, until you've the business is strong enough, there's enough money coming in, and you've got too much to do where you actually have to hire people, instead of doing that in anticipation of growth. And part and parcel of that is getting paid first. Like, getting paid. The idea would be to get paid before the product's even launched, because the idea is so good that people want it. But failing that is to build a company based purely on revenue. So that's another thing. And I think also it's never as good as it seems or as bad as it seems. I think it's even the worst moments. In retrospect, you're like, I could see where I felt that was like the end of the world, but I got through it. And even like at the high points, you're like, all right, that was a nice peak in the graph, but looking backwards, it doesn't feel that different then. So I think there's something to that as well. It's like, don't get too excited when you're doing well, and don't get too discouraged when you feel like you're up against it. It's like you're probably learning things in the process, and I think there's a level of grit and resilience to it that I have now too. I'm not easily put off these days.
It's a cliche that I have confidently tattooed to my arm, that this too shall pass, because whether you're happy or sad, this too shall pass. So in closing, Andrew, all I want to ask is for you to tell the listeners and viewers where they can find you, where they can contact you if they want to, and anything else you feel like you need them to know to get in touch with you.
Yeah, so the company I run, one of the companies I run is GroundSource, and you can email me at andrew@groundsource.co. I'd love to hear from you. I'm also Southwest Voices is the news site for Minneapolis I co-founded, and you can find that at southwestvoices.news. And then building a new company that'll be kind of the combination of GroundSource and some other things, and we're going to be calling that Relatable, and that's to be not to be announced, but we're going to be working on revealing that over the next several months.
Awesome. Andrew, thank you for your time, and I'm really excited to say that for GroundSource, it's not over.
Oh, it's not. Thanks, Nick. This has been great.